Here's the most frustrating thing about every DBD killer. We all have different opinions, experiences, and skill levels, so I'd love to hear what you guys think down in the comments below. Trapper, when a survivor just follows you around the entire game, rendering your traps completely useless. Playing this killer already feels like you have no power, but when you're actually able to set up your traps and put them around the map, and then having this little mosquito following you around, buzzing in your ear, and disarming your traps everywhere you go is so annoying. Obviously, this is the best thing to do as survivor, but it's so frustrating because you spend all this time going to get your traps and putting them up in a good position just for them to get taken out like 5 seconds later when you leave. Wraith, having to rely on hit and run against competent survivors. I love playing Wraith for the amount of variety that you can do with different add-on builds and such, but when you play against survivors that are actually good at the game, you're pretty much forced to play one specific playstyle to do well with this killer. And that one specific playstyle of hit and run gets very tedious, where you just cloak, you find somebody out of position, you uncloak, you hit them, you recloak, find another person, and repeat the cycle. Hillbilly, the inconsistency of his chainsaw. Sometimes your chainsaw will go literally straight through a survivor. Sometimes that initial sensitivity of your chainsaw feels higher than it normally is. Something just feels so much more off about the chainsaw nowadays than he used to be, and I have a feeling it has to do with the amount of new maps in the game and their kind of terrible hitboxes. But who knows, it could also be a latency or ping issue as well, so I don't know, the chainsaw just feels very inconsistent in many situations. Nurse, when you charge your blink for a really long time, only for you to go completely nowhere. This is, of course, avoidable if you know why this happens. This happens if the destination of your blink is not within a playable space, but sometimes it totally feels like you held it for long enough and it still doesn't let you through an object. One of the most notable examples is on Suffo Pit. There's the walls that divide the two halves of the map, and you cannot physically blink through them, even though you'd be teleporting into the playable space, and it makes no sense. If you're new to Nurse, I'd recommend using the Plaid Flannel add-on, which shows you where your blink is going to end, and this will help you visualize when these moments would be taking place. Myers, when the survivors just hide the entire duration of your tier 3. Now, this doesn't happen often, but I have run into it a couple of times where survivors will literally do nothing the entire time you have your tier 3. It is the most boring thing ever. I hate stealthy survivors just in general because it's just so boring. But survivors who are stealthing optimally to not give you any value out of your tier 3, so you're just walking around the map for like 1 or 2 minutes not seeing anybody, it's just the worst thing ever. I'd rather play a walking simulator game. Hag, pretty much the same thing as Trapper. When a survivor follows you around the entire game, triggering your traps, this is of course quite frustrating because it feels like you can't really do anything. If the survivor knows what they're doing and you teleport to that trap, you won't be able to hit them, so they'll just keep pulling you away from whatever you're doing, and it's just very frustrating. But now survivors can wipe away your traps without even having to trigger them, so not only could they pull you away, they could also just get rid of them completely, and there's not really anything you can do. Doctor, when ping/latency allows a survivor to vault a window or throw a pallet even though you timed the shock perfectly and they screamed before they did the action. The static shock has always been very finicky depending on ping, and sometimes it'll just straight up not work. On your screen, it shows that you made the survivor scream and it hit them before they even got to a resource, and then they'll still be able to throw it or vault it. I hate when that happens. It's already difficult trying to time your static shocks with the weird delay that it has, but factoring in ping and latency with that is even more annoying. Huntress, when the hitbox doesn't visually match an object, so your hatchet hits an invisible wall. This is especially annoying on loops that you can see over, and it looks like you'd be able to throw a hatchet over it to hit a survivor on the other side, but the hatchet just hits thin air and breaks. I cannot stand when this happens. Bubba, when you trigger your tantrum because you bumped into a wall or an object that is below your field of view. There's a lot of objects on like Eerie or Coldwind or some other maps where the hitboxes are below where you're actually looking, so if you're trying to turn around a tight corner of like a rock, for example, you might bump into something that you can't even see because it's below your camera, so it looks like you just bumped into thin air. I feel like there should be some sort of leeway if the hitbox is below a certain height. Nightmare, when a generator that you're about to teleport to gets popped. What I'm specifically referring to is if you have, like, for example, Pop Goes the Weasel, and you're trying to hook a survivor as quickly as possible because you know a gen is getting close, so you have to still hook them and then teleport to that gen to pop it, but then that gen gets completed before you're able to even start your teleport. This honestly just feels like a kick in the ass. It's just beating you while you're already down. The Pig, when you get a map where survivors can W key whether you fake your ambush or not. So what I mean by this is sometimes when you go into your crouch, survivors will just completely leave the loop. So then what you have to do is start going into your crouch and immediately standing back up. So you're essentially faking your ambush to try to catch them off guard to get them to leave the loop so you can catch up to them. But on some maps, there's so many pallets or the loops are so close to each other anyway that even if you fake the loop, they can still W key and make it to another resource before you catch up to them. So at that point, an entire part of your power is just completely useless, and there's no point in even trying to use it. Clown, when you're trying trying to use your yellow bottle for speed, but you mistime it, so you walk straight through it without actually getting the speed. Obviously, this is a skill issue, but everyone that has played Clown has experienced this at least once in their lifetime, where you'll throw the bottle ahead of you because it has that little bit of delay before it actually turns yellow. But just as you leave the gas is when it turns yellow. So you either wasted a bottle and you just continue moving forward, or you step backwards to get into the speed burst and then continue forward. So it's just a really clunky situation. And obviously, you can easily fix this by not being bad, but it is inevitable that this happens at least once. Spirit, stealth players. Like I said earlier, how much I hate the stealth playstyle. So obviously, against a killer that can't even see the survivors, the stealth playstyle is even worse. Like you just won't be able to use your power pretty much the entire match unless they're injured. But if they have Iron Will, then that doesn't even matter either. I cannot stand stealth players in any asymmetrical game ever. Legion. This is definitely a me issue, but sometimes my finger will like accidentally twitch and I'll double click M2. So I'll start my frenzy and then instantly cancel it. This was the only thing I could think of because the Legion is so simple that there's not really anything frustrating about them. But I remember doing this a couple times, especially when I had a broken mouse that kept double clicking for no reason, even if it wasn't my own fault. So I would just give myself extra fatigue and extra cooldowns out of nowhere, and it was super annoying. Plague. When you hit a survivor with your Vile Purge and they do the animation / scream thing, but they don't actually become sick. I don't know why this happens. I don't know if this is a ping issue or if you need to hit them with a certain amount of Vile Purge before they actually get sick. I don't know what it is, but regardless, it's giving me a visual indicator that I hit them with my puke. So why isn't it getting them sick? It's just kind of annoying. It's kind of like hit validation on killer. You know, when you hit a survivor and they scream and give you the blood, but then they don't actually get injured? It's kind of like that. Honestly, maybe it is that. Ghostface. I gotta give this to when you're quickly trying to lean around a corner to stalk, but it doesn't actually make you lean, so you're just staring at a wall. I swear I do this so often, and it's especially hard on like trees and stuff. I think just the circular object hitbox just kind of makes it jank. So sometimes it's super finicky when you're trying to quickly lean around a wall. Demogorgon. Hitting invisible walls when you're trying to shred off of high places. This is so annoying because like the shredding off of high places is one of the most fun aspects of the Demogorgon. So on maps like Haddonfield, where you have double stories and you can shred off of the balconies and stuff, why are there invisible walls that go like 10 feet above the hedges so you can't shred over them, even though it's very clear that you would be able to? That just makes me angry because like there's so many fun things that you'd be able to do with Demogorgon if the hitboxes weren't extended so high. Oni, auto locking in your power. This is a huge issue for a couple killers, most notably Oni and Nurse. Well, auto locking is basically when you swing and you lunge toward a survivor, but the game auto locks your weapon onto a piece of the environment instead of the survivor. So this happens a lot with Oni when you're doing curves in your ability. Sometimes instead of hitting the survivor that's right in front of you, it'll register it as you hitting the wall. So your weapon will just bounce off of thin air and not actually hit the survivor. It's especially frustrating when that happens and your power goes on cooldown right after. Deathslinger. When you visibly see the spear go through the survivor, but it doesn't actually grab them. This just feels awful. Like obviously the hitboxes need to be very precise for this gun or it would be borderline overpowered, but sometimes it's too precise and your spear will go right through the survivor. You can see it visibly. Like if you clip it and go frame by frame, you can see it go straight through the survivor and it doesn't attach to them. Whenever that happens, you just feel completely robbed because missing a shot is very detrimental for this killer. Executioner. I'm just gonna say the fact that literally every add-on except for a few are completely worthless. I love when killers have a large variety of add-ons because it completely changes your playstyle. Wraith and Myers are a very good example of this, but with Executioner, you pretty much only have the ranged add-ons and none of the other ones are even worth using. And this hasn't changed in so long. Like I hope they go through it and actually make every add-on useful. Blight, I think this is very obvious, but it's sliding off of walls when you're trying to bump on them and then getting kicked out of your power because you ran out of time. I stopped playing Blight for this reason alone. It was the most annoying thing to be chasing a survivor and you try to bump off of a wall, but you just slide right off of it and then you go on cooldown. It just felt like it was not in your control at all. And it was so frustrating that I actually quit playing this killer because of it. The twins. When a survivor is looping Victor around a circular object and you finally catch up to them to pounce, but it hits the object rather than the survivor. This is kind of similar to the auto-locking issue with Oni and Nurse, but it's with Victor instead, just because the hitboxes are so whack that sometimes it'll visually look like you're gonna hit the survivor, but it'll hit the wall instead. And it's worse on Victor because the survivor can then just come over to you and kick you. So it feels like the survivor just gets to kick you even though it was out of your control. Trickster. I'm honestly gonna go with the recoil. I find the recoil of the knives just kind of unnecessary. It just feels very janky and makes it difficult to go for long shots. shots, so it kind of de-incentivizes people to go for cool shots. But I have to give an honorable mention to playing against bots. I cannot stand, like sometimes I'll get gameplay with bots just because it's easier and it's faster than, you know, waiting in a long queue. But I cannot for the life of me get good gameplay against bots with this character because they're coded to dodge projectiles, but every single knife counts as a projectile. So whenever you try to use your knives against bots, you either are missing them entirely, or if you're close enough, they just completely stop where they are and there's no interactivity at all. And this will probably happen quite frequently in public matches because so many people DC against the Trickster. Nemesis, when your zombies legit do nothing the entire match and are completely useless. This is a very frequent occurrence. The zombies are either amazing or they just stand there stuck on like a rock or something. Cenobite, when you successfully hit a survivor with your chain only for them to instantly break them with the environment. I like the fact that you can break chains with your environment, and I think that's a fun and interesting interaction, but sometimes the survivor is in such a specific position to where the chains that spawn can be broken like almost immediately, and it's as though your chain did nothing. Whenever this happens, it just feels awful. You did this mostly skillful play of hitting someone with your chain just for you to not be rewarded for it. I also wanted to give an honorable mention to just the fact that hitting survivors from far away with your chain doesn't do anything useful. I feel like there should be additional chains or something depending on the distance away from you. So if you're able to hit a chain at like max range, it spawns 6 chains instead of 3 because you're rarely going to be able to hit these. So you should be rewarded if you're able to actually do that. Artist, when you're trying to place your crows, but it won't let you for whatever reason. I run into this issue a lot. Sometimes it's my own fault, like the cooldown isn't done yet and I'm still trying to place my crows because it still lets you like pull up your hand to place crows, but then it doesn't actually place them until the cooldown is done. But also sometimes you aren't able to place the crows if you're like too close to a specific obstacle or too close to a wall or something. But it's a little bit inconsistent depending on the map, so I just find that a bit frustrating. Onryo, the fact that it's not super visually clear whether you're manifested or demanifested. Obviously, if you're looking at her hands, you can see whether or not her hands are blinking out of existence, but when you're focused on the gameplay itself, you're sometimes so tunnel visioned on something that it's hard to tell whether or not you're demanifested. And I think what really makes this worse is the fact that the animation is the same for demanifesting and manifesting. So even if you couldn't see her hands, the animation doesn't tell you if you're cloaked or not either. Look at Wraith as a good example of being visually clear. Well, not only is it visually clear, it's also auditorily clear because cloaking has a faster bell and uncloaking has a slower bell. I think they could tweak her just a little bit, whether visually or auditorily, to make it clearer on which mode you're in. Dredge, locked lockers. Like, do I really have to explain it? You could make the coolest play ever, the most 300,000 IQ play ever, and then you teleport to a locker and it's locked, and then your entire cool play is completely mitigated. It's so annoying, and I hate it. I hate it so much. Wesker, the finicky nature of certain map environments and their hitboxes randomly stopping you from dashing, or when you pick up a survivor and you just glide off of walls and throw them and they still don't get hit. I know the hitbox issue is repetitive for a lot of killers, but it really is the most frustrating thing about these killers. Killers that are so movement based or hitbox based are going to inherently be annoying when their power doesn't work properly. And sometimes you'll be using his power for mobility, but you'll hit like some tiny thing in the environment and it'll just stop you dead in your tracks. And it's really, really annoying. The Knight. I'm going to give this to the clunky feeling of placing the patrol path for your guards. I just despise the way this feels. Like the way the camera moves from your character to the orb and the weird sensitivity of like moving to the sides and just like the acceleration and deceleration. Something just feels very off about it. It kind of feels like when you're using your sword on Pyramid Head, it's just so clunky for no reason. And I feel like they could easily smoothen this out to make it feel better to use. Skull Merchant. This is a tiny nitpick and it's probably a personal preference, but it's the fact that your drone is placed where you click the button and not where the animation finishes. To me, it's so much more intuitive and satisfying to time the drone animation so that it places when the animation actually shows the drone being let go of for your hands. But in reality, unless they changed this recently, I don't really play Skull Merchant, so they could have changed it. But to my knowledge, from the few games that I have played as her, the drone will appear wherever you clicked the button initially. So if you're walking in a straight line and you click the button, it'll still have the animation of you throwing up the drone, but then the drone will teleport to where you clicked the button. I just find that super strange and way less satisfying. Singularity. When you can clearly see a survivor in one of your cameras, but it's just not registering them for whatever reason. Singularity is already difficult to play as, so when the power doesn't even work properly, that's obviously going to make you frustrated. Again, it's another hitbox issue, but sometimes it'll literally just be like a survivor hiding in a bush, and it won't actually auto-lock onto them. Xenomorph. I gotta go with the inconsistency of your tail attack. It's such a precise hitbox with like a very strange hitbox mechanic and a very strange delay, where a lot of times it'll look like your tail hits them with the animation, but behind the scenes, the hitbox doesn't actually interact with their hitbox, so it just doesn't register as a hit. This just feels awful because you're getting robbed of hits that you clearly should have gotten based on your visuals, but the DBD gods just decided decided for it to not work. Chucky, I'm gonna give this to the automatic scampering. I really wish that the scampering was manual when you're using slice and dice, because sometimes I'll want to, for example, curve around Shaq, but not actually vault the window, and it'll just force me to vault the window even though I'm trying to go around it. I think it'd be much better to just like hold spacebar or something if you wanted the automatic scamper to happen, because it being automatic gives you a lot less control than you would have had otherwise. The unknown. I'm gonna give this to directly hitting a survivor with your UVX instead of with the blast radius. Sometimes the survivor will just barely dodge your orb, except it'll still hit them physically, but doesn't actually apply the weakened status effect to them. It's honestly not that frustrating, but this killer doesn't really have that many annoying things about his kit. So I would say that's the worst part. Vecna. The fact that you can't move your camera when you cast your dispelling sphere. I cannot physically understand why this is a thing. I'm sure it's for some programming reason, but having your camera locked while you're still moving is a super clunky feeling, and being able to move your camera after using your sphere would just be such a nice quality of life feature. And lastly, for the Dark Lord, I don't really know. This character is so uninteresting that I have no desire to watch gameplay or play as him. So if you've been playing him, let me know down in the comments what you think is the most frustrating part of his kit. If you like this video, you'll probably like this one where I talk about the most satisfying thing about every single DBD killer. So come check it out. Adios, goodbye, bye-bye.